Hi, my name is Andy Hawker. I love things that go fast. I'm hoping that we can have some fun together. So join me as a fellow disciple of speed. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited today to talk about, in this episode, the Indy 500. Let's start with a little bit of history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. In 1909, four gentlemen had decided they were going to build a test track in a cornfield in rural Indiana. It was Carl Fisher, James Allison, Arthur Newby, and Frank Wheeler. And they wanted to build a 2.5 mile square ovalish kind of track and provide a place for all of these burgeoning, these new automobile makers that were all over Indiana, Detroit, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, that whole region there. Initially in 1909, it was a dirt track, and there were all kinds of races that were happening. You know, as soon as two guys get their cars out there to test them, right, inevitably there's going to be a race. And that's what was happening. People were bringing out these automobiles that were initially sort of stock cars, but then they were modifying them, and they were having several races throughout the year in 1909. But later, this dirt track became dangerous and was not really well suited to sustain this. So the owners decided that they would pave the track with brick, and 3.2 million bricks were laid around the 2.5 miles of the speedway. And that's why to this day it's still known as the Brickyard. In 1911, though, they had this idea that they would hold just one race a year, a sweepstakes. And in that one event, they would just invite everybody to bring their car that they built and have one massive show to see who the winner is. They chose to do it on Memorial Day, and is also a way to honor the military. And they wanted to have a race that would last approximately 6 hours long to make it sort of an endurance race. So they figured that at those speeds at that time, that 500 miles would be just right to make the race last 6 hours. Ray Haroon was the first winner of the very first Indianapolis 500 in the Marmon Wasp. Now, at that time, the driver had to have a riding mechanic because being 2.5 miles long, if something went wrong, there has to be somebody who could fix the car. But Ray didn't want to do that. He wanted to lighten the load. He was the only driver that did not have a riding mechanic. Now, that was declared unsafe because the mechanic could also look behind to see where cars were coming up on them throughout the race. So Ray mounted a mirror in front of him so he could see behind him. The very first mounted rear view mirror on an automobile. The track was closed in 1917 and 1918 due to World War I. And then it reopened, but in 1927, Fisher and Allison decided to sell, and they sold it. They had an offer from a real estate developer, and they didn't want to do that. They wanted the track to remain. So they sold it to Eddie Rickenbacker. Eddie Rickenbacker had been an automobile racer before World War I, but was also a highly decorated flying ace in World War I. The races continued on then until 1941 was the last race, and they stopped racing from 42 to 45 due to World War II. During this time, the speedway became very dilapidated. Eddie Rickenbacker at that time really was just not able to continue, didn't really have interest. And so a former racer named Wilbur Shaw was out looking for investors, somebody to buy the track. Private owners wanted to buy the track for their own purposes, but Wilbur Shaw also wanted to see the races continued. So he contacted Terre Haute businessman Tony Holman and who bought the track then November 14th, 1945. Now, Tony was a wholesale grocer who made a fortune with Clabber Girl baking soda, baking powder. Tony bought the Speedway and really brought it into its modern version that has continued to this day. In 2020, the Holman George family sold to Penske Entertainment Corp., which is owned by Roger Penske. And Roger Penske's group now owns the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I first attended the Indy 500 in 1986, which is the year that Bobby Rahal won. Attending this year, the 107th running, was my 20th time to attend the Indianapolis 500. Now, in those 20 times, I've had the privilege of inviting and bringing people from the Netherlands, England, Morocco, Japan, and Lithuania. This year I attended with my friends Mike Engel, Lucas Vasnonis, and his wife, Shanae Vasnonis. And we had great seats. It was an amazing, amazing race. It was won by American driver Joseph Newgarden, who drives for Roger Penske, Team Penske, in the mandated Dallara chassis and with the Chevrolet engine. The race was very exciting, right down to the last few laps when they had three consecutive wrecks, causing 3 red flags. Now, red flag means the competition stops. The reason they did that was that, unlike NASCAR, IndyCar, in the Indianapolis 500, they will run 200 laps, period. And if there's a yellow flag at the end because of a wreck, and there's 3 laps to go, and it takes all 3 laps to clean up that race, then whoever was leading at that lap 197 is the winner, because there's no passing under a yellow flag. Well, what they've done differently this year is they really want to focus on the competition, and they want to make it very much a spectator, an experience for the spectators. And so they wanted to have a racing finish, and that's why they stopped competition, they cleaned up the track, and they went out and raced again. And it was, again, very, very exciting. I want to look at some die-cast history that relates to the Indy 500. Okay, we're going to start with these cars. These are Hot Wheels cars, and these all relate to Indianapolis type race cars. But this first one came out in 1969 from Hot Wheels, and this car is the Lotus Turbine. Now, the real Lotus Turbine was owned by Andy Granatelli, and nearly won the Indy 500 in 1967 and in 1968. But both times this car suffered a late race, failure, unfortunately. This car and the next one were both owned by my good friend Doug Morrill, who gave these to me with his collection, and they're absolutely gorgeous. The next one is called the Indy Eagle. Now, the Indy Eagle is based on the Gurney Eagle, which is the All-American Racing team. And Dan Gurney and Carroll Shelby were behind this car. They competed at both Indianapolis and Formula One with the Gurney Eagle. The Indy Eagle specifically won the 1968 Indy 500 with Bobby Unser driving it. And this is just a great piece right here, still in fantastic condition. Now, this car is the Brabham Repco F1. I'm sorry, Brabham Repco F1. Now, this was just a Formula One car. This did not race at Indianapolis, but again, another beautiful piece. This car came out in 1969 also, as did all of these 4. Now, this car was the Shelby Turbine, following up after the Lotus Turbine. They built their own chassis, All-American Racing, and this car was raced in, I want to say probably 1969, I believe it was raced. Did not win, but another amazing car. Now, they did have to change some of the rules at Indianapolis to move the cars away from turbines. That was a kind of a big deal at the time, and there was some obviously disappointment by a lot of people. These were both campaigned by Andy Granatelli. These are two representative cars that Hot Wheels made in the 1970s that don't exactly look like any particular car like these four do, but again, some great pieces from their idea of open wheel racing, whether it be IndyCar or Formula One. Then next, we have some Hot Wheels designs that are pretty specific to Hot Wheels, sort of similar to some of the Indy cars, but you can see Quaker State, Pennzoil. This was Craco, and then this was just branded as Hot Wheels. But these two are identical, and then these are three different designs of cars. And then they came out with this one in the 80s or 90s, I guess in the early 1990s, and they just called this an Indy Racer, and this one is just decorated with some Hot Wheels specific graphics. This one came out this year in 2020. It is called HW4 Track. So again, sort of looks like an Indy car, sort of looks like a Formula One, but it's a great looking car as well. So these are the Indy cars, or I'm sorry, the Hot Wheels that are kind of most closely related to the Indy cars. Next, we'll take a look at some Matchbox. Here we have some of the Matchbox cars that are mostly related to Formula One, frankly. But there's some great little cars here. This is just called Grand Prix Racing Car, 1988. Here's another one that's very similar to that one. Formula One, 1993. So pretty generic names. Now this one, however, though, is very clearly a Ferrari. This is all decked out to be the Ferrari. It's called Grand Prix Racing Car from 1988, but obviously it's meant to be a Ferrari. Here's another one. This one is the F1 Racer from 1984. It's a fun little car as well. Very reminiscent of some of those kind of almost blunt nose Formula One cars. This would be an example of a pretty early one. This is actually a Lesney, so made in England, just called Formula One. It's in very good condition. One of my 1 to 75 cars. Now this one I like in particular. So here we have, this one is called Formula 5000. And it's also considered a Lesney. It's got the super fast wheels. And what I like about it is the tampos that are on here. Actually, these are stickers. And so this is Texaco number 11, Goodyear. And here, though, it's interesting that it says Marlboro on a children's toy. I kind of get a kick out of that. And I think not everybody did, because they must have quickly decided to make a change and go with Champion for Champion spark plugs. So I have the Marlboro and the Champion version. So it is kind of interesting that somebody thought that'd be a good idea to put onto a children's toy. But again, it was, let's see, 1975. So back then, a lot of people still smoked. And then we have, obviously, the last one here, this Team Matchbox. This is one of my cars I've had a long time. It's just called Team Matchbox. That's the name of it. It was number 24 Lesney and made in England. And this one I've had ever since I was a kid. So I really enjoy this car a lot too. Next, let's look at some other Formula One cars. As we talked about, we also had a Formula One race this past weekend, the Monaco Grand Prix. So let's look at some Formula One cars. This is a Johnny Lightning car, 1969 Indy car. This came out in 1996, I think it was. Pretty good shape. It's got a little bit of wear and a little bit of use, but it's kind of interesting that this car has one nose wing, and unfortunately I believe it's missing the rear wing here. But a fun car, driven by Racer X. So this is, I'm sure, part of the that series. Here's a car that is made by a company called Majorette. That's a French company, just F1 Ferrari. So this is also another Ferrari, and Ferrari being the oldest continuous Formula One team, a lot of cars are Ferraris. A lot of die-cast cars are Ferraris. A lot of famous race cars, a lot of famous drivers. This is another one. The rest of these are all Hot Wheels. This is also Ferrari. Now this was their Ferrari 156, so a very early race car, number 2. They put this out a few years ago, and it's kind of called a shark nose. It's sort of known by that. You can tell by the nose there. And then these cars are basically the same casting, but this one obviously again is a Ferrari. These came out in 1989. I'm sorry, 1998, and a Ferrari. Then this one was after it's got Mika on there for Mika Hakkinen, but it's after the team, the Mercedes team that he was driving for. This was after the Jaguar team. All of these stickers that they put on these. This was the compact. It was the B&W powered. I forget the team that this drove. Oh, it was BR Racing, I believe. And then lastly, this one was kind of funny because it's Buzzin' Hornets, but it was actually sponsored by a cigarette brand, so they couldn't do that, so they had to call it something else. These last 2 cars are really fun. This is the famous, let's start with this one here actually. It's the famous Tyrrell 6-wheeler. This is an older one. It's called Lickety 6, made 1977. This one was made in Hong Kong. It's a little rough. It's got some paint chips. Some of the tampos are kind of rubbed off too as well. But it was a really great casting at the time, and it was representative of the Tyrrell 6-wheeler. So the front 4 tires, wheels, would do the steering, with the larger big rear wheels doing just the power. And you can see a better representation of it here. So Hot Wheels redid this a few years ago, and so now we have the Tyrrell P34. This came out I think in 2011, and this is a very good representation of the Tyrrell. But I've got another one that I want to show you, and so that leads us in really to the last of the cars that we're going to look at. A couple more that I wanted to highlight. This is a set that Johnny Lightning put out years ago, and this was a set that included the winning car and the pace car for that particular year. This one happens to be 1977, and this number 14 was the AJ Foyt car that he and his father built. They raced it and they won with it. This was the car that he won his 4th Indianapolis 500 in, and the one that he was the most proud of, that 4th win. It was unprecedented at the time for somebody to win the Indianapolis 500 4 times, and AJ Foyt was the first one to do it. The pace car that year was the 77 Oldsmobile Delta 88. What's significant about that was AJ Foyt was very close with the owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Tony Holman. They'd become very good friends, very close. And the race winner would always take a parade lap in the pace car to wave to all the fans and have everybody cheer for him. And typically, Tony Holman would ride along in the passenger seat. But AJ Foyt wanted Tony Holman to ride with him sitting on the back of the car up high here behind, in the back seat, but up on the roof area there, so that Tony could experience riding around the track. It's very significant because of their friendship, but it's also significant because that was the last race that Tony Holman would be able to be at his own track. He died the next year before the race. Yeah, it's a great set. Now there were 8 sets that Johnny Lightning put out with this duel of different winning cars and pace car, and I have the whole set, so it's really a lot of fun. They're still unopened. I don't think I'll ever probably be able to open them. Greenlight is another manufacturer that really does a great job. And this is the Indy 500. They call it an event car because all it really has on it is the logo for that year's Indy 500. This one happened to be from 2015, one of the races that I attended. And I've got several different green light Indy cars from over the years, event cars, cars specific to drivers and so forth, but they just do a really wonderful job. Okay, lastly, I want to look at some cars that I bought at the Indy 500 this year. These two are still in the package. I was just talking about the event car. This is this year's event car. I'm also wearing this year's t-shirt from the race, the 107th running of the Indianapolis 500. You can see that right here on the card, 107th, 2023 Indy 500 event car. So and it's a great representation of the race car this year. So that's the event car, and here is a pace car from 1980, the Pontiac Firebird TA. I have a bunch of pace cars, but I didn't have this one. I saw this one, obviously had to have it. So it's a beautiful car too. Both are green light. Again, green light just really does a nice job. The next two are, these come back to the Formula One, but I bought these cars this year, and these are really special. These are by a company called Mini GT. Now these have also amazing detail and are great scale. This one is the John Player Special. What's interesting about the John Player Special is that it was actually a Lotus 78 sponsored by John Player, and this car, the number 5, was raced by Mario Andretti. This campaigned in the 77, 78 seasons, I believe. And again, just a beautiful, beautiful die cast, great detail. Love the intricate work in the back. And you can see the engine and the driver's compartment, really, really nice. The next one is also Mini GT, and this one is another version, but a very, very accurate version of the Tyrrell 6-wheel race car. So this is the Tyrrell P34. This one won the 1976 Spanish Grand Prix. And again, Mini GT just does some incredibly beautiful work on their cars. Again, the smaller wheels up front, which did the steering, and then of course the much larger wheel in the back. I thought it'd be fun to compare the 3 Tyrrells that we have, and we'll just go by age. This is the oldest one in my collection. Again, this one is dated 1977 was when this was made. This one was made in 2010. I believe probably came out in 2011. And this one I just got this year. They're very, very different sizes, obviously. This one is probably the closest to scale at 1/64 scale. But just love the versions of them. Beautiful cars. Okay, and the last car that we want to look at that I got this year at the Indy 500 is a 1/18 scale Indy car. This one we're going to open right now. This is the McLaren, Aero McLaren Dallara with Chevrolet power. It was driven by Alex Rossi, and it's in the classic McLaren light blue and orange. So yeah, let's get this guy open. This is a great example. Most of the cars, obviously, that we look at are that we've been looking at have been 1/64 scale, so it's kind of fun to look at something bigger. And we'll get this open. This is the first time I've had it open. One more piece of tape. There we go. I was very excited to see this car at the Speedway Museum because I have a real soft spot for McLaren, Formula One, and IndyCar, and it really goes back to the founder, Bruce McLaren. He was such a brilliant, innovative engineer and an amazing race car driver, and somebody that we lost way too soon. But the team carried on. McLaren in Formula One is the second oldest continuous Formula One team. So here we are. And there's obviously some stuff to take apart there. So here we have the car coming out of the plastic. And we will set this aside. And oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. Look at this car. This is absolutely gorgeous. I'm very, very happy with this. It's a great looking car. It's going to be a great addition to the collection. And I only have one other formula car that is 1/18 scale. So this is great. Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. You can see the ground effects under here. One thing that I will say about this car that's interesting is that this is actually set up for a road or street circuit with the large front wing and the large rear wing, as opposed to what we would find for the Speedway. I'll bring this event car back in, and you can see a much smaller wing area in the front as well as the back. For the much higher speeds of the Speedway, you need less drag, less resistance, so smaller wings, enough to provide the downforce. But where you don't have as high as speeds, but you've got much tighter, faster corners, you want more downforce. So that's why there's bigger wings for the road setup. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for indulging me, letting me go through some of the history of the Speedway, my history with the race, and my collection that has some of the cars of the Indianapolis 500, the IndyCar, and also Formula One. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.